Well, it's my pleasure to introduce my good friend and an amazing American, a guy named Ian Rowe, who is a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. He founded the Vertex Charter Schools in the Bronx, one of the poorest communities in our country, and he's had incredible success there. And he's the author of a new book called Agency, which we're going to dive into today and learn more. And he also was involved in the 1776 Unites campaign.
Yes, with the Woodson Center.
With the Woodson Center, another great American. Ian, welcome and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. I'm excited for our conversation.
Well, Ian, let's begin with your passion for education. You saw a need in the Bronx and co-founded Vertex Partnership Academies.
Yes.
What led you to launch Vertex?
Wow. Well, that is a great first question because it's a question that it's really summed up by almost a lifetime of having had access to a great education. Myself, I'm a product of the New York City K-12 public school system. So I'm a big believer in public education as the common pathway through which kids can achieve success regardless of your current standing. And in places like the Bronx, District 12 in the Bronx, in 2015, of the 2,000 or so kids that started ninth grade in that school district, 4 years later, only 7% graduated from high school ready for college. 7%. Meaning...
And what was that number when you went to schools? And how has that changed over the years?
It was slightly higher. It was slightly higher, but it's been in places like the Bronx, in concentrated areas of low-income populations. It hasn't been great for a long, long time, And the thing is, in this district, when we say 7%, there are two different phenomena going on. The first is that some of those kids started ninth grade and they drop out, or they actually do earn their high school diploma, but still can't do math nor reading without remediation if they were to go to college. So which is worse, that you drop out or you do what you're actually supposed to do and you still can't compete, right? And this is a phenomenon going on across the country. And what makes it worse, and this links back to why I started this new International Baccalaureate High School, is that there's a legislative barrier. There's a cap on charter schools, right? Which are public schools that are usually founded by education entrepreneurs who want to bring a high quality education into a community that hasn't had it. But in New York City, if you have a great idea to serve, those 93% of kids who are graduating, who are not graduating, ready for college, you couldn't do it. There's a legislative barrier. And so we were able to figure out in a very innovative fashion a way to take existing schools that ended at middle school and essentially allow them to extend their charter. So you didn't need a brand new charter in order to be able to open the school. And for that good deed, the teachers union actually sued us, just to give you a sense of how hard it is to create great schools. So I can go into a lot more detail, but that's why we started this school, to answer the immediate need that here's yet another district in New York, like many others across the country, where for generations, kids have not had a real shot at the first rung of becoming successful.
And then you said that 7% are graduating from their public schools, right?
Ready for college, correct.
Ready for college. I mean, that is awful. That is something that we are not proud of.
It's criminal.
It is absolutely criminal. And you were fortunate. You graduated, and you said that you went to school in New York City.
Oh, yeah.
And you were one of the fortunate ones, and you said it was only slightly better. How is it that you achieved so many great things yourself? Because you've gone to have great success in education in your career. So what's the difference between you and other students who went to those public schools?
Yeah, it's a really important question, because I had an amazing public school education for sure, and I can talk about the elements of that, but I also had other things. I had two immigrant parents who came to the United States in the late 1960s, who came in search of the American dream. They had a strong belief that Jamaica, which is the country they were coming from via England, they weren't running away from this tyrannical country where they felt they were oppressed. They were running to the United States. They were coming to the United States in search of opportunity. And they had a belief that with a strong family led by their strong marriage, my parents were married for 48 years before my dad passed away. So that was the first anchor that I had a level of predictability in my life because I had two married parents in a stable, loving marriage.
Right.
Didn't mean I didn't bicker every now and then, but that, that was the first anchor. The second was that they had a strong faith commitment. So they taught my brother and I that there's a way of living, like there's a way of being in this world, that there's actually right and wrong. So with those two as anchors, on top of that, then I had access to a great K to 12 education. I went to Brooklyn Tech, which is considered one of the specialized high schools in New York City, which means that you take a test to get in, and I majored in electrical
It
engineering.
was one of the better schools. It was a high-achieving school.
It's a high-achieving school, yeah.
And what would have happened to you if you didn't go to Brooklyn Tech? If you were put into a traditional school in New York,
That would have been a problem. That would have been a
Where would you
problem
be
because
today?
we lived in a remote part of Queens at the time, and the high school that we were zoned for was Springfield Gardens High School, which ultimately became one of the most dangerous high schools in the city. And so I had the opportunity to take the test, and I got into Brooklyn Tech. So I was commuting at least an hour and a half to 2 hours each way in order to get to high school. Yeah, because I take a bus, then a train, then a bus.
right?
But that's what you do, and you read on the train. You convert that time into productive time. But that was the point that I felt, and the thing is, I didn't feel that special. In fact, when I had graduated from Brooklyn Tech and then went to Cornell afterwards, and then I was working at Anderson Consulting, I was mentoring in public schools, and I saw lots of kids that were incredibly talented, but simply by accident of zip code or family structure, they didn't have anywhere near the opportunities that I did, and that just seems unjust.
Ian, elaborate more on the zip code issue. We talk so much about wealthy families live
Yeah.
in better zip codes where better schools exist.
Yep.
They can send their kids to a private school or to maybe a higher achieving public school.
Yep.
But let's go into so many families, they really are trapped. And what does it mean for them? If you're trapped in a zip code where your education's not good, what is your expectancy in your education and what's going to happen in your life because of that?
Yeah. So, there's always this great debate about school choice, and people are against school choice. And, oftentimes the people that are most against school choice are the very people who are exercising it in their own lives, right? They are middle or upper class. They've been able to move to a suburb so they can go to public schools that are exceptional. They can send their child to a great private school, a religious school. They have choice, and good for them. The problem is not everyone is in that situation. Imagine if you were a 22-year-old mom, single mom, and you had a kid at 17, and so your kid is now ready for kindergarten, right? And you're in this district, in District 12, a district in which only 7% of kids graduate from high school ready for college. And no matter what choices you may have made in your own life as a 22-year-old mom, you will crawl through broken glass for your kid so that they have a better shot. But the school system is telling you, sorry, the best we can do is your kid has to go to that school, and that school has a track record where 93% of kids aren't going to make it. That's what the reality is, right? And so it's enormously hypocritical when I encounter people who are, standing in the way of school choice. That's going to destroy the public education system. Meanwhile, when they go home at night, they're asking their kid, what were all the great things that you did in your school of choice today? And that's the hypocrisy that I think we have to confront.
We have parents who send their kids to good schools. They are living the American dream, but so many families are not living the American dream, and they are the roadblock. They are the impediment for those families. Why does it exist? It doesn't make sense to me.
Courage, or lack thereof. In New York State, which is where I run my schools, we opened up this new high school. We were sued by the teachers union. Thankfully, we won. And the governor, Hochul, actually proposed to lift the cap right? To lift the cap so that there wouldn't actually be this artificial barrier to allow people to actually be able to open great schools for low-income kids throughout the city. She made that announcement, I forget which day, but the next day, the leadership of a particular party, who's heavily supported by the teachers union, came out and said, this lifting the cap will destroy public education. All that we need is more money, in a state where we're already spending more than $30,000 per student if you add up in all of the per pupil funding.
And 7% ready for college.
I mean, if you look at data over the last 30, 40 years, spending on schools and academic performance, it's unbelievable. And so why does that exist? Well, A, there's some people who have a vested interest in status quo, unfortunately, and not enough courage for those who really are at least saying in verbiage that they're representing the interests of primarily of low-income people, but they're not.
Right.
And so I and many others are trying to carry the baton for people who all they want is for their kid to have a shot at the American dream.
And you are carrying that baton. And conversely, Vertex charter schools, the schools that you have created, are doing very well. The students you're serving are the poorest families, the most underserved families in New York City.
Yep.
Tell us a little bit more about your students and how well they're performing when they go to your schools.
Yeah, so we're something close to 90% of our students receive what's called free and reduced price lunch, which is kind of the federal indicator for poverty.
These are the poorest of poor families.
Yeah, the districts in which we run our schools are literally some of the highest poverty school districts in the country. And primarily because it's so concentrated. So you've got projects where you've got huge buildings of apartments. So you've got concentrated poverty. So, and these are kids who unfortunately have been failed. A number of institutions have failed them. And I don't want to create a stereotypical sort of caricature, but our kids are coming from pretty tough situations. High percentages of low-income, certainly low-income single-family homes. The non-marital birth rate is about 84%, which again you see in lots of other places across the country, whether it's New York City, Chicago, Baltimore, Appalachia. It's what I call the sort of equal opportunity tsunami, where the degradation in family structure across race is really one of the biggest challenges facing many of our communities. So that's something that a lot of our kids are facing.
And also, statistics are showing that if you come from a family that is a family of poverty, and what you just mentioned, these students are not doing well in school. These are the students who are falling through the cracks and failing. But again, you're serving those students, and they're graduating from your school.
Yeah.
And are they prepared for college, and are they going to college?
Well, we certainly believe our kids have been and will continue to be. I mean, the key is that poverty doesn't have to be destiny, right? Like we tell our students this all the time, that you're in a school that has the highest expectations of what you have the ability to achieve. And so there's an institutional component of what we're doing, and we can talk about what we're doing in our school to create unbelievable opportunities. But there's also an expectation that you as a student, you have to rise up too, right? That this is not just a deliverance. This is you are part of your story. Like one of the poems that all of our students are going to learn is a poem by William Ernest Henley called Invictus, where the last two lines of the poem are, "I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul," right?
Right.
There are no victims in our school.
Right.
They're only young people who can become architects of their own lives. But if everyone around you is sending these narratives, oh, because of your race, because of your class, because of your gender, here are all the things that you can't do. Here's how the system is rigged against you. Here's how you're going to be discriminated against. Here's how you're going to be oppressed. If you hear that over and over and over and over again, after a while, you start to believe it. It's a phenomenon called learned helplessness. And that's, again, something that we think it doesn't have to be that way. And we need more institutions that are demonstrating the sense of possibility for what our kids can achieve.
And so a lot of your students come to you with a victimhood mentality because that's all they've heard in their lives. What are some of the principles and things you're doing in your school? You mentioned Invictus. That's great. I love the tagline. That's awesome. Are your students embracing it?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And
Yeah.
elaborate a little bit more, some things that your teachers and the administration are doing to help your students understand they can be anything they want to be and enjoy a great life in the greatest country in the world.
So the entire school is organized around the 4 cardinal virtues of courage, justice, temperance, and wisdom. And we chose those virtues because, cardo is actually the Latin word for root. So all other character-based strengths are some manifestation of courage, justice, temperance, and wisdom. And so it's really important that our young people understand what does wisdom mean? Having the ability to step back and build knowledge and be able to reflect. And what does temperance mean? Self-restraint, self-regulation, the ability to be able to focus and study and not be distracted by all the things going on in your life, right? So that's really important, so that every ritual, everything that we do somehow can be connected back to these 4 cardinal virtues. But there's also very practical things that we teach our kids. Are you familiar with this phrase called the success sequence?
No.
Okay.
No. Love to hear more.
Yeah, so the success sequence is it's a fancy name for data that has been repeated over and over and over again in studies in the United States and abroad. And it basically says, if you're a young person and you take these steps, which is to finish at least a high school degree, then get a full-time job of any kind, just so you learn the dignity and discipline of work. And then if you have children, if you got married first, 97% of millennials who follow those steps avoid poverty. And the vast majority enter the middle class or beyond. That's an enormous piece of information, which the vast majority of kids, especially kids in the communities we serve, they don't hear about.
And not only do they avoid poverty, future generations also avoid poverty as well because their education begets a good education for their children.
A lot of progressive people or more left-leaning people often talk about these solutions. It's called 2-generation solutions. And they're normally talking about it in the context of a single mom and their child, and can there be ideas like job training or a daycare center at a community college, right? Because the idea is that maybe you're serving 2 generations at the same time. Well, what if the 2 generations we were thinking about was a young person and the future kid who hasn't even born yet, but influencing how this young person thinks about not the family that they're from, but the family that they form, right? We teach this in our schools, right? And we teach these ideas not in a prescriptive fashion, meaning you must live your life in this way and make decisions in this order. What we say is, look, in the next 10 to 12 years of your life, you're going to be making big decisions about your education, your work, your relationships, the timing of family formation, and here's some information. This set of steps, evidence shows 97% of the time, people who do it avoid poverty, and they've broken the intergenerational cycle of poverty. This series of decisions, in a different order, yields these outcomes. This set of decisions in this order yields this. But you're the architect of your life. You choose. And what's been interesting about that approach is that it respects young people as future decision makers in their own lives. They're not being dictated to. It's one of the things we've learned about, if you really want young people to embrace ideas that are sort of in conflict with what the general culture is, you have to create a pathway where they're the ones that actually see it and embrace it for themselves.
And your students are admitted to your schools through a lottery.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so tell us some stories about those who are not admitted to the lottery. And you probably have thousands of families, I'm guessing, who go through this lottery, but only a select few are admitted every single year.
This is torture.
And I remember waiting for Superman when the movie came out many years ago, and they showed these heartbreaking videos of all these families that were doing anything they could for their kids
Yep.
to be admitted to a school,
Yep.
including lying on their forms so they could go to a charter school
Oh
in
yeah,
a
no, we
separate
have
district,
families who'll
right?
move into, they'll like, temporarily move or ask an aunt for an address just so they can,
They're desperate.
they are desperate. When I was running another network of elementary and middle schools, pre-K through eighth grade, we had maybe 200 openings each year, 200 opening seats for intake. And every year, the lottery, we had these unbelievably wonderful calls where we literally hear shrieks of joy, right? When we call to say, your child got the golden ticket, they got in. But imagine how heartbreaking and bittersweet it is to send a note to nearly 5,000 families that were on our wait list. The best we can do is put your child on this excruciatingly long list. And those 5,000 families are real families who deserve a shot too. And that's why when you see things like a cap, you know, I would love to bring these legislators in who again are exercising school choice in their own personal lives. But I would love to bring them to, and let's sit with those 5,000 families and explain to them, why are you standing in the way of me and my child, regardless of whatever decision I may have made in my own life, but I want the best for my kid. Tell me why. And it's enormously frustrating, but we're going to win over time.
Well, we are winning. We're making progress, right?
Yes.
When you look at the school choice movement, whether it's private schools, charter schools, ESAs, right now it's a historic year for
Yes.
ESAs and our legislation right now.
Yep.
We're winning this battle. And you remind me of a story, a guy named Charles Johnson, who lives here in Denver. And he was a quarterback for the University of Colorado football team and actually helped them win the national championship in 1990. He grew up in inner city Detroit. And he and his best buddy both were trying to get into Detroit Country Day. Charles got in, his buddy Tug did not. And he goes on to tell the story that his life was vastly different than Tug. He goes on to be a quarterback at CU, to have a great career.
And also be part of a network of other people who could help him, they could know, and also understand that there are multiple different ways of living your life.
Right. He was educated, now he's a great leader in our community. And then conversely, his buddy Tug, he's in an inner city school that's not educating him. He gets involved with gangs. He makes bad decisions. He's incarcerated. And eventually he's tragically murdered. And those are the stories of so many kids who are being left behind.
There is unfortunately, there are things like the New York Times 1619 Project, which came out a few years ago, which basically laid out this case that America is an inherently oppressive nation, that based on your race, your class, your gender, the system is rigged against you. They literally said America has, quote, anti-Black racism running in the very DNA of the country. The country, according to them, the country wasn't even founded in 1776. It was founded in the year 1619. These kinds of narratives are out there. And so myself with a group of other leaders said, you know what, we're going to counter that. The problem is that so many of these bad ideas are out there, and we were in sort of this cancel culture where people feel scared to push back, and we just can't. This is where courage, it's the first cardinal virtue, is so important. So we actually created a whole curriculum to respond to the 1619 Project to
1776 Unites is what it is.
1776 Unites.
And as a Black man, you're taking this on with Bob Woodson, a great American hero as well.
Absolutely.
Have you had good success from
Oh my
1776?
God. Yeah, so we created this curriculum, which in our view tells the more complete story of the African American experience in the United States. So not only do you, for example, one of our Tulsa Massacre, which is a horrible event in the history of the United States, but in our curriculum, you first learn about the creation of Black Wall Street and this enormous wealth that was built in the Black community during the Jim Crow era. How did that happen? How could such wealth be built then? And if that happened then, why couldn't that happen now? So a whole section on that. Then the Tulsa Massacre, which again is this horrific event. And then the third piece of the unit is on the rebuild and the wealth that was recreated. And so we think that that is a more complete, warts and all, telling of the African American experience in the United States. That curriculum has now been downloaded more than 85,000 times by teachers in all 50 states, in every kind of school, charter school, private school, home school, after school, church, prison ministries. So what that says to us is that there's a yearning for a more positive, empowering answer on all of these issues if we have the courage to push it forward and not just step back and cower under the fear that we're going to be called all sorts of bad names because our kids are depending on it. In fact, I think, for many people like you and I who may be out in the world doing our thing, the people who we need to sort of rise up, people are pushing these ideas of America's oppressive, America's racist, America's this. They're actually counting on you to be silent. They're actually counting on you to give up your voice. You are handing over power when you do that. And so part of what I try to do is inspire folks to say, you're not alone. When you see an idea where someone's saying to your 7-year-old, oh, no, you're not a boy, you're actually a girl, that's not real. That's not real. And you have to have the courage to say that, but know that you're not alone, or that you're inherently a victim because of your race. No, I'm not. No, I'm not. But there are people who will push that idea forward, presuming everyone else in the room is terrified to push back. And if any of your listeners this is like the one thing I want them to take from this podcast is have courage. Have courage in that moment.
Ian, talk about your book Agency. You wrote the book Agency because, as a courageous leader, you wanted people to hear this narrative that you do not need to be a victim, and that's the basis for your book. So talk a little bit about your book and why you wrote it, and those key messages. You've already alluded to some of them already. I'm also curious, what do pundits think about your position that you're taking?
Yeah. So, the reason I run schools, right, is that I want our kids to know that they can do hard things. And unfortunately, there's a lot of narrative out there that's telling young people all the things that they cannot do in this country. And there are these two, what I call meta-narratives, that I think are impeding young people's ability to have a sense of agency, to have a sense that they can lead a self-determined life. And these two narratives I call blame the system, and the other I call blame the victim. In the blame the system narrative, that's similar to what we've been talking about, this narrative that America's racist, it's oppressive, capitalism itself is evil. There's a white supremacist lurking on every corner, and no matter what you do, the system is so rigged, so discriminatory, so powerful against you that you are powerless to overcome, right? And so inherently, that makes you kind of feel like you are a victim. Like you don't really, unless the government, like some $1 trillion reparations program comes out where the government's showering money on you, I guess I have to wait for someone else to liberate me. That's what blame the system is all about. But on the other side, blame the victim is another view, which says, no, America's great. America's not the problem. You're the problem, right? So if you're not successful in this country, it's because you didn't pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. You are the architect of your own failure. You have not done the things that you were supposed to do. And it's really hard to pull yourself up by your own bootstraps if you're a 7-year-old kid growing up in District 12, where only 7% of the kids graduate from high school ready for college, right? So we have to have some grace that between blame the system and blame the victim, it's like either you're powerless and the system is rigged against you, or it's your fault. That doesn't leave a lot of space for kids to be able to see a path forward in their own life. And yet, in my own work over the last 30 years, running schools, working at MTV, working at the White House, working at Teach for America, in my own education, my own life, I've seen kids similar to what you just described between those two young men, that kids raised in pretty challenging situations, domestic violence, poverty, fatherlessness. I've seen kids as they enter young adulthood recreate those same bad decisions where they now have continued that same cycle of deprivation. But I've also seen kids in those same exact situations of poverty, dysfunction, family drama, all of it, as they enter young adulthood, they've made different sets of decisions. They've broken the cycle of disadvantage. And the question, the animating question of my life, the reason I wrote my book Agency, is what makes the difference? What is it that those kids had access to that the others did not, even though they were coming from very similar backgrounds? And my observation over the last 30 years is seeing that those young people who were able to break the cycle of disadvantage had a sense of personal agency. This idea that they could lead a self-determined life. And but and but it's not like agency didn't just come from nowhere, right? It's I define agency as the force of your free will guided by moral discernment, right? The force of your free will guided by moral discernment. So if you think of agency like a vector or velocity, velocity is not just speed, it's speed and direction. So the question is, where does that come from? Where does the ability to become morally discerning come from? And that's where these four pillars of family, religion, education, and entrepreneurship, free, what I call my free framework, are so important. The young people that I've seen break the cycle of disadvantage, the first anchor of family, they recognized it wasn't about the family that they were from, it's about the family that they form. So many of those young people were on a pathway to follow the success sequence: education, work, marriage, then children. That was the first anchor. The second anchor that I observed for young people who broke the cycle of disadvantage was they had a personal faith commitment in their own life. Whether it was Christianity, Buddhism, almost didn't matter. It's just they lived by a moral code. And they were usually part of a community of people where they had rituals, going to church on Sunday, whatever it might be, but they were part of a community of people that expected them to live up to this moral code. So that was the second observation. The third observation is that young people who broke the cycle of disadvantage usually benefited from educational freedom or school choice, right? So they, even if they were in a district where only 7% of kids graduated from high school ready for college, somehow, some way, their parent or guardian got them into something else, a charter school, an ESA, something that allowed them, a religious school, that allowed them to see a different path. And with the anchor of on the pathway to forming a strong family, strong personal faith commitment, access to educational freedom, the last piece was that they had an entrepreneurial spirit. They had this idea that working hard towards, it's almost like they were problem solvers in their own lives. They were part of a community of people that loved them and supported them. So these four anchors: family, religion, education, entrepreneurship. And so me seeing those forces and it's those pillars, those four pillars that help build a sense of personal agency. That's why I wrote the book, to create an empowering alternative to the blame the system and blame the victim ideologies that, in my view, are tearing young people's aspirations down.
Well, absolutely. And also, there's a belief out there among some people that if you're low income, your destiny is continued poverty and failure. And so, what you're saying is you can break that cycle of disadvantage. You're breaking that cycle of poverty long term as well. You have many teachers in your schools who probably came from families of poverty. You have many students that have succeeded in their lives when the odds were stacked against them.
Yep.
Can you share a story of a student or maybe a teacher that you work with now that came from a difficult circumstance and they're saying that because of my education, I am a different person. And if
Oh,
it
yeah.
wasn't for that education, I likely would not be where I am today.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Love to hear a story from someone that really has impacted your life.
Yeah, I mean, I'll think of one, one young woman, I won't say her name, but one young woman who's raised by a single mom. And there was she and her brother. They had challenges, but she was an exceptional student and exceptional in the sense of not inherently more brilliant than everyone else, right? But she was part of a culture in our school where you worked hard, you did your homework, you went home and studied, you did your thing. That's when we were only through 8th grade. She got into Exeter private school, then went to Yale, and she had experiences where she traveled to China, and she comes back now and says, this was a great anchor in my life. The people around me didn't always have the kinds of opportunities that I did. Gosh, we have kids, Howard, Tufts, Skidmore. Like our list of colleges, our list of jumping off points that our students now have as a result of the education that we provided. And not just the education in math and science and reading, but the education in core values and virtues. And what does it mean to lead a virtuous, flourishing life? Yeah, and this is the thing that always frustrates me about these people who are pushing this message. Oh, you're poor, so therefore this, or you're black, and so for that. We have tons and tons and tons and tons of evidence of people in low-income situations, kids of color, or white kids from Appalachia. If they embrace these pillars, typically family, religion, education, entrepreneurship, nothing's a guarantee, right? There's no magic elixir. However, we have a lot of collective wisdom over generations of what really contributes to a flourishing life. In the Black community, for example, the poverty rate for married Black couples has been in single digits, like 7 or 8%, for generations, for as long as the data has even been recorded. It's like, well then that's interesting. Maybe there are factors beyond just race that could make a huge difference in what the likely outcomes are for a given group of people.
Ian, you're a positive, affirming person. You're optimistic. You have a belief that your greatest days are ahead of you.
Yeah.
How do you convince pundits who don't have that same mindset to believe that America is a great place and that education is an equalizer and that we could level a playing field if everyone had widespread choice in our country?
Yeah.
How do you convince your pundits to do that?
Yeah, part of it's storytelling. Part of it's just sharing real examples of what's possible, and another is being savvy to understand data as well. So I'll give you for example, because oftentimes pundits will use what's called the racial wealth gap. According to the 2019 survey of consumer finances, it's right there. The median wealth of the average white family is about $160,000 more than the wealth of a median Black family. That is a fact. If you take only race alone, there is a pretty wide racial wealth gap. And there are those who just say, there it is, that's proof. That's proof of historical racial discrimination, it's proof of present-day racial discrimination. So therefore, the US government must now allocate a couple $1 trillion to pay Black people to make up for what Nicole Hannah-Jones of the New York Times calls, quote, 400 years of racialized plundering, end quote. And for some, that's the end of the story, and many pundits run with that. But if you look at that same survey, the same 2019 survey of consumer finances, and take into account just two factors, family structure and education level, the wealth of the average Black, married, college-educated family is about $160,000 more than the wealth of the average white, single-parent family. Literally reversed.
And so your point is that if you find a Black family that's educated
and married,
they will succeed in our
by the
country
way,
and they'll make good money.
Even just education alone, but it's the dichotomy that the proof of the $160,000 when race alone is taken into account is completely flipped on its head when you take into account family structure and education. That to me screams that maybe we shouldn't only be focused on this single lens through which we evaluate what the likely outcomes are for our fellow Americans. So that's one of the ways in which I've testified in Congress on these points, and it seems to break through that maybe there are other things, starting with strong families, then having access to school choice, are being fundamental to giving kids a real shot.
Ian, I've heard some people over the years say that education is the last great civil rights movement of our time. What are your thoughts on that comment?
Yeah, so I'm obviously a huge believer in education. The thing, and the reason I wrote my book Agency is education, a great education, necessary, but not sufficient, in the sense that there are other factors that contribute to what it means to lead a flourishing life. We can never overestimate the importance of family. So while an education is great, a public school education is still only, from 7:30 in the morning to 3 or 4 in the afternoon. Like what happens the rest of the day and on the weekends? And so, and the value of a personal faith commitment. I mean, the data is overwhelming. When you look at kids who have a personal faith commitment in their lives relative to kids who don't, much lower levels of depression, alienation, isolation, lower levels of consumption of porn and social media. It's actually quite extraordinary. And so I just think we have to think about, this phrase is often used, the whole child. So education and school choice, it's a bedrock, it must exist, but we can't put the full onus on the transformation of opportunity for our young people solely based on school choice. It's obviously important and crucial, but we also have to talk to young people about things like the success sequence and what it means to lead, to build a great family, and also promote the benefits of a life of faith too. Not everyone is going to do all of these things, but we know the ingredients of a fulfilling life. Why do we deprive young people of knowing those things too?
In today's scholarships, many of our schools are faith-based. Many of our families want to put their kids in faith-based schools because it's congruent with their family values. Yet there are some people who say there should be a separation of church and state, that when you pass these education saving accounts programs or tax credits or a voucher program, that government money should not go to a faith-based institution. Yet we see time and time again that families are happy, they're educated, they're doing well, they're making their communities better. So what do we do to combat that argument that there should be a separation of church and state? And thankfully, we have a great Supreme Court case in the Espinoza case that has now made it very difficult to subscribe to the Blaine Amendment, which is good. But what are your thoughts on that comment right there, particularly when America was founded as a country that has embraced any kind of faith, regardless of who you are and what you believe in?
Right. Well, again, similarly, there are lots of middle and upper class families that are taking their dollars and spending it in private religious schools, right? And good for them. That is, when it comes down to it, that choice of how to spend that money, whether it's public or private, in my view, is almost irrelevant because it has to do ultimately with the parents' decision about what they think is best for their kids. And so, so educational ESAs are now out there where many localities are saying, essentially, this is your money. And how you choose to use it, if you choose to use it as a voucher to go to the private school across town or to the religious school, that's up to you, parent. And I think that the more that we push power in the hands of parents to make individual decisions about their kid, and as you say, I think the Supreme Court, certainly in its current configuration, will continue to support this general idea. I think it's good for kids and good for families.
So, Ian, this was a historic year for school choice legislation. It was remarkable. ESA programs all across the country were passed.
And still coming.
They still are coming. That's right, more opportunities. Mostly in Republican states, mostly red states. But in bluer states, that's not the case. Why is school choice a partisan issue?
I mean, the teachers union sued us where we were launching an international baccalaureate high school, a world-class school, right in the heart of a district where only 7% of kids are graduating from high school ready for college. They sued us, right? So, and thankfully we won. We beat, we set a major precedent. But unfortunately, there are powers that be that have a vested interest, and unfortunately, it seems like it's often in the Democratic Party and their affiliation with the teachers union. And it's such a disservice because you actually have to separate the teachers union from teachers, right? Because most teachers want to do a great job for their kids. But it's the union that I think, unfortunately, oftentimes stands in the way. But I don't know, as we're saying, more and more power is being placed in the hands of parents. And if there was any silver lining of COVID, it's that for 3 years, most parents had a level of visibility into what their kids were learning, whether it just be the quality of instruction or some of these other ideas around critical race theory or gender theory, that suddenly kids were being taught things like, wait a minute, I didn't sign up for that. And so more and more families are saying, I at least want the option to exit to a better opportunity.
Ian, we have much to celebrate. We have much to be optimistic about.
Yeah.
This was a great year, and we are on the right side of history more than ever. What would you say to anyone who's listening? What should they do? What role should they play in education reform? And what role can they play at ACE scholarships to help us advance our movement even more?
Yeah. Well, I think the most important thing is what's your own sphere of control, your own sphere of influence. In my own school district, so I'm out in the country, I run schools, I'm out in the country talking, but in my own school system with my own 2 children, I started to see signs of things that I did not agree with. Our school district had done what's called an equity audit, where suddenly our town and our school district are being painted in ways that I thought were completely off base and would lead us down a very different path. So I decided to run for school board in my own town. And it was an amazing experience. I was fortunate enough to win, but now I'm part of the leadership of our school board that is dictating what is the future. That may not be the right role for everyone, but it could be running for school board. It could be donating to places like ACE, which gives kids unbelievable opportunities to pursue scholarships. It could be writing an op-ed in your own hometown. It could be going to teach. It could be mentoring. It could be becoming a tutor in a community that's right next to you but doesn't have the benefits that you do. I think so, but I think it first starts with this idea of courage.
So, Ian, in closing, we know that when you invest in a student at ACE scholarships, when you invest in a student through your charter school network with Vertex, when you invest in school choice, it works. We have much to be optimistic about and excited. Our country is on the right side of history now.
Yes.
It sounds like we need to continue fighting and doubling down and doing all we can because there are too many children who are relying on us.
Well, one of the great things that we can do is actually look back in history. When de Tocqueville was observing America, he wrote Democracy in America. He made this statement. What makes America the most it's not that it's more exceptional than any other nation. It's that it has the ability to repair her faults. And I've always believed in that statement because what he's saying there is that our country has the tools of self-betterment, the tools of self-renewal, our Declaration of Independence, our Constitution, our amendments, always in pursuit of this more perfect union. I think in the same way that we look at our country as this grand experiment about how to become better, that's how we view our kids too. You have the tools of self-betterment and self-renewal within you. And places like ACE are providing the opportunities so that young people can exercise those tools and discover their own pathway to power and what it means to lead a flourishing life.
Boom. That's incredible. Ian, you're an amazing man. Thank you for being with us today. Thank you for inspiring us and helping us be greater. And on behalf of all the families who've been served through ACE scholarships and all the families who will in the future, thank you for your leadership and being a great partner in this amazing movement. Again, we are on the right side of history.
Yes, we are.
Love you, buddy.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate you.
Awesome.
Thanks so much.
Yep. Awesome.